Hi everyone, welcome to an episode of Off the Record. It's a segment of my show that I do exclusively for locals, but as you can see, this one's going a little wider because I have to address the Joe Kent resignation. And for those of you that follow me on socials, you would know that I have been addressing this, particularly on Instagram, as I was not only giving the play-by-play as things were happening, I told you what was going to happen. So none of this really comes as a surprise, but unfortunately, those that are in the wider space that have not followed me on socials didn't see these updates, and you're probably already entrenched in either side of this argument about Joe Kent's debate. But what's honestly pretty hilarious though are the people that have reached out to me and told me they never heard of Joe Kent until today. I'm like, well, if you're considered right wing, you would have heard of Joe Kent. Okay, and I'm gonna go into a little bit of that history. People are entrenched in their ideologies because of confirmation bias. Right now, it's the dissident right, also known as the woke right, which I'm not going to use that terminology because I would not give James Lindsay the pleasure. I need to address this because there are people that have become entrenched on either side of the ideological debate that are saying things that are incorrect, such as those on the right calling Joe a coward. Are you kidding me? The dude served his country during the global war on terror, and so did his wife. They were both in active duty at the same time, okay? And they had to be away from their kids. They had little kids growing up. His wife passed away because of some terrorist bastard. And to call him a coward, that's stupid. Now, for those of you on the dissident right, though, that are saying that Joe Kent is being persecuted or lawfare is being waged against him because he was critical of Israel, that's where you're wrong, because just like these people that have been straight up with me and told me that they never heard of Joe Kent until today, you're probably living your confirmation bias right now because you never heard of him either. But because you're seeing what's playing out, you believe this is just a flash in the pan moment, and therefore you need to stake it right here because you're seeing it play out that the Israeli lobby is coming after Joe Kent. I did put some notes together, and I'm going to make sure I'm probably going to read it verbatim just because to keep it together. This is like my fourth attempt at trying to record this. I get very emotional and I don't want to go down rabbit trails. So I had to prepare something before this. But before anything else, this is the original post by Joe Kent on his personal X account where he announced the resignation. And when I saw that post go up, I was immediately livid. I held my tongue. Instead, I posted it. I post linked to Sarah Adams, who had choice words for this, which I will share a little bit later here. But also, before reading this, I want to say that I will be reading an article that I prepared yesterday before Joe made his appearance on Tucker Carlson's program, because I was very busy. I couldn't do a video. That's why I needed to get some information out there that nobody else was talking about and still isn't, except Sarah Adams and those like her that rise above the noise, because everybody's just on the left or right of this pathetic issue. Yes, some of you dissident right, you're behaving like leftists. So yeah, left and right. So anyway, those that rise above the politics, no one's talking about it. So I had to address it. And while I have my perspectives, I believe that Joe Kent is grandstanding on this, and I'll make my case as to why. I'm still frustrated that nobody else is addressing the main issue, which I will get to. So here's what Joe wrote just over 48 hours ago as of this recording. After much reflection, I have decided to resign my position as director of National Counterterrorism Center effective today. I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran poses no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. It has been an honor serving under POTUS and Director National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and leading the professionals at the NCTC. May God bless America. And of course, there is that, I didn't even read it when I reacted. I was so upset. So when I read that, I got even more upset because like, great, now I know what's going to happen next. Let me give you a nutshell of how the mudslinging is going. You have those on the right that immediately after this happened, and some Trump admin officials that were running cover for the administration and throwing dirt, saying that, oh, there's been speculation that Joe Kent was leaking intelligence to the media, probably even to Tucker, because Tucker is his friend, which is true, by the way, that they're friends. And I'll mention Tucker again here in a moment. But at the same time, they say that he was not being given any intelligence briefings since June last year. So what could he have possibly been leaking? This is just me addressing the stuff that's out there because the optics on the other side is all bad. Okay, I'm granting you all of that. To everyone on either side of this, the optics don't look good coming from the administration, just that the optics don't look good coming from Joe Kent. He made this bed and he's going to sleep in it too because he knew damn well what he was doing. Okay, so Joe makes this claim, Israel, and immediately he's already booked with his friend Tucker, and that video goes live 36 hours later. Okay, because they went live first behind the paywall, and then it went public for everybody else. All right, and he's going on Candace Owens' program. Sure, that helps your case. It just makes you look more fringe. Okay, but the thing is, to a lot of people that are not familiar with Joe, believe that this is just a coming out moment for him when it's not. Now there are people on the dissident right that are also defending Joe in case he did leak intelligence, saying, well, it wasn't classified. It's like, what the hell? It's like, why would you trust somebody to leak anything? If you can't trust them with the non-classified, why the hell would you trust them with classified? This is the history of Joe Kent that probably many of you are not familiar with. Joe Kent has a long history of being critical of Israel. This is nothing new for those that already knew. One of the main reasons he's lost his congressional bid for Washington State, because he ran for, I think it was the 3rd District of Washington State for Congress in the year 2022. And then again in 2024. He lost both times. In 2022, when he started his campaign, Nick Fuentes was the one that was helping him with his campaign. I think through funding and stuff, but they tried to play it on the down low because Nick knew that he could be radioactive for his campaign. But Joe said, I'm with you. I wouldn't, what do they call it? I wouldn't disassociate myself with you, and etc. So that was one of the reasons that he lost the 2022 race, because of the connections to, these are reported, supposed white supremacist groups and alleged anti-Semitism. So when he ran in 2024 and lost again, by then he had distanced himself away from Nick Fuentes. I'm not sure if he denounced him too. That I'm not entirely sure. But Nick Fuentes has told this story before about Joe Kent. He said it about a year or two ago. So this is nothing new for those that are in the know. Despite that history, though, of him supposedly being associated with white supremacists, with Nick Fuentes, or anti-Semitism, or all of it, Trump still nominated him. Okay? He nominated him, and he was confirmed by the Senate. And that was a razor-thin margin for how he was confirmed. Okay? So here's something that you perhaps don't know if you haven't been keeping your ear to the ground on a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of news, and a lot of people they don't follow the news cycle because there's just so much stuff going on. I don't blame them. But look, last June, he was among a short list of suspects that were allegedly leaking intel from the White House to the media. Now, I didn't address that at the time because there are friends of mine that were defending him. Probably didn't realize in the context of what was being spoken about, but friends of mine that are acquainted with him were defending him at the time. Okay, so that's why I stayed out of it. And it was on a down low thing. I'm like, well, what could possibly be sparking him? Why is he a suspect all of a sudden? So that was, it came and went. That was back June 2025, I think. Okay, so we're talking about 8 months ago, at least. I say that because the context to what's happening right now in this political theater that's occurring. Okay, his sudden resignation, followed by the investigation I knew was coming, throws everything for a loop. Like I said, I grant you, it doesn't look right. He criticizes Israel. FBI's investigating. We can't even investigate Eric Swalwell. We can't even investigate who was responsible for the coke in the White House and all these different things. I get it. I get it. And there's people, oh yeah, you can go after him, but not the guys in the Epstein files and whatever. Look, a lot of you are stuck on that because, again, it's confirmation bias. But here's the big difference in all this, though. What's being alleged, and just how does all this connect to Tucker? Well, let me bring it up like this. On one hand, Joe suddenly resigning, and the investigation is announced. Bear with me here. Looks like he was trying to get ahead of it. Okay. Because he immediately ran to Tucker, and he's immediately running to Candace to try to have some kind of defense in the court of public opinion, which is happening right now. Tucker made recent post just a few days ago where he said that the CIA was allegedly spying on his text messages.
The CIA is preparing some kind of criminal referral against me, a crime report, to the Department of Justice on the basis of a supposed crime I committed. What's that crime? Well, talking to people in Iran before the war. They read my texts. So the crime under consideration apparently would be the Foreign Agent Act or something like that, acting as an agent of a foreign power.
He's not denying that. He's more upset at the fact that he was being spied upon. Tucker has been spied upon for the longest time, even in the previous administration, because he was already trying to sit down with Vladimir Putin, and Biden's administration made sure to put a stop to that. He still got to have his interview, but his signal was hacked so they could spy on him, and that was under Biden. So for Tucker to have this, like, they're spying on my text messages are not secure compared to Signal, unless that's what you're still implying. You should know better at this point, honestly, dude. But that's my point. He's not denying that this happened. He wants you to be upset that he was being spied upon, which brings up the question, what the hell were you talking about? Was it because you're trying to arrange an interview? Okay, that's a good cover story too. But here's the thing. Tucker goes ahead and announces this ahead of time, and then just a handful of days later, like what, not even 5 days later, his friend, Joe Kent, resigns, and he rushes to Tucker immediately to host his first tell-all interview. This is why it doesn't look good for either side. If they were going to bring this up against Joe, they should have brought it up a long time ago, not wait until now. Or maybe they were bringing it up, but he tried to get ahead of the pass and resign immediately and then run cover because he booked that interview really, really quick with Tucker. And then just, tell everything ahead of time and then eventually going on to Candace. But Tucker has at least 17 million followers on X compared to like a third of that for Candace, which are just an overlap of Tucker's followers. But Tucker has received leaked intel from the White House, allegedly. So the question is, was Kent one of those that was leaking information to him? That is going to be the thing that's going to be talked about. And it's not a good look for either of them because I'm sure it's going to be brought up. It's already being talked about. But that was my immediate thoughts. Like, dude, you literally just gave your critics, Joe, you gave your critics the cannon fodder to use against you. That's why the optics don't look good for those on the right that support President Trump in all this. And then in the case of Joe, like, dude, you have a history of this. Your issues with Israel, you were nominated and confirmed in spite of that history about this. And people are going to make the accusations and make stories against Joe Kent. That's what political theater does. But I want to highlight some of the stuff for why I'm upset, for why he was integral to this administration. And I just wonder, was his confirmation bias just not? Was it too much? Because he should know better. And someone on the dissident right said, yeah, he knew better. He had access to all this intelligence. And you know what? He looked behind the curtain and saw that Israel was pulling all the strings. Bloody hell, man. Really? Some of you even agree that he was cut off from the intelligence briefing. So what the hell was he even looking at? You can't have it both ways. You can't say he peeked behind the curtain, but there was nothing to look at because they withheld it from him. It's like, oh my goodness. From the interview with Tucker, there were some things that he was saying that I already knew he was going to say. Anybody that knew anything knew everything he was going to say, pretty much. But there was this particular snippet that pissed me off. And that I'm going to address before I tell you what you should be upset about. Because, again, it's your confirmation bias that's getting in the way of you being able to have discernment and to properly think about things. So he said this on a Tucker Carlson program yesterday.
And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing, in the stairway. And I said hi to him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said very loudly, and it's a small, you've been in the West Wing, it's small, it's a tight space. And he said, Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran.
I'm sick and tired of people dragging out Charlie Kirk that didn't know him in life, maybe acquainted or at a distance, to suddenly draw out like quotes of his or say that he said this to me the last time I saw him or whatever, and supposedly that backs up their opinion and such. I think that's absolutely stupid. I don't like that Joe Kent did that. He didn't know Charlie. He was more aligned with people that Charlie was in a way opposed to. But Joe brings out Charlie Kirk. Like, look, two can play at this game, okay? I'm going to pull up a quote from Charlie Kirk about the last time we bombed Iran and see if it lines up with what he just said. But before I say any of that, just keep in mind that a lot of them on the dissident right hated Charlie Kirk when he was living. They're only trying to draw out his quotes and oh, look, did you see this and did you see that? You guys didn't listen to him when he was alive. You guys are piecemealing a lot of things to make it look like it's pushing your confirmation bias, and that's why we can't get through to you, because you're so closed. You're so closed, hard-headed. But if we're going to drag out Charlie Kirk, this is what Charlie Kirk had to say about that. And then.
And you might say, Charlie, do you support or oppose this? I support President Trump. That's my answer. I know the man. He's the commander-in-chief. He's the man for the hour, and he's had the weight of the world on his shoulders. So in a situation like this, I support my friend, and he's had my back and I have his. That's my perspective. By the way, I also look at this and I say, and I understand the arguments of people that, oh, don't intervene and all that. I get it. But boy, have we not exhausted so many diplomatic channels and options.
I told you that you should be outraged about something. And right now people are like, yeah, look, they're going after Joe Kent because critical of Israel. You can't be critical against Israel. Yeah, you can't criticize Israel. That's why Tucker is bigger than ever. That's why Nick Fuentes is bigger than ever. That's why Candace is bigger than ever, raking in a ton of money. But you can't criticize Israel because, they'll hurt you. It's like, you're making more money than ever on that issue. But here is where something actually is happening that none of them are talking about. And I'm glad that Steven Crowder brought it up. In December 15, 2025, this post from Zoran Mandani, current mayor of New York City, he posted, 1 million Muslims live in New York City. We belong here, as does every other New Yorker. This is vile Islamophobia from the councilwoman, and it has no place in our city. What are they talking about? This post from Councilwoman Vicky Palladino. We are in the midst of a global jihad the likes of which the world has never seen, and we cannot ignore it. We need to take very seriously the need to begin the expulsion of Muslims from Western nations, or at the very least, the severe sanction of them within Western borders. The administration needs to begin developing a formal legal framework for the denaturalization process and get it over with before we end up with 9/11 or worse. Enough is enough. This was in response to the Sydney terror attack that left at least 10 dead. And what's happened since then? Councilwoman Vicky Palladino is being brought up on ethics committee, a hearing where they will listen to removing her from the council. She was voted on by the people, but the council are upset at her, so they want to remove her. And the attorney that she's facing off with is a former Al-Qaeda terrorist attorney. How come your dissident right folks are not talking about this or denouncing this? If anything, they're running defense for radical Islam all of a sudden. What the hell? This is the stuff they complain about. But because it's not Jews, they won't bring this up. I'm going to read to you my post on Joe Kent's resignation that I wrote. The article is available on Pickaxe, Locals, and Substack. And for those of you watching and listening, you want to read it on your own, I'll be leaving a link to it in the description down below, wherever you're watching and listening. You can check that out. I don't think this is going to be on my website, but definitely check out the socials. I'll be leaving a link to it there if it's not already there. And for this, it's a bit of a lengthy read, so I'm going to try to get through it. But I want you to understand why I covered the rest of that, because it warranted a response for the latest in this pathetic political theater, because Joe ran to Tucker Carlson, as we all knew he would. That was paying attention because they're friends. And then he was spewing everything he had to spew, which was no surprise to anybody. But then he brought up Charlie Kirk. What the hell? So now that's frustrating. But my article isn't to any of that. It was trying to get ahead of that crap, because I knew this kind of conversation was going to be lost among the right and the dissident right, because they're entrenched in in their ideologies, and it's frustrating to me because I wished if they had devoted just an iota of effort for local matters, it would address almost every single damn thing they're complaining about. Because low information voters would screw us up every time we go, and that includes MAGA when they turn up only for like a presidential election, maybe the midterms, unless Trump tells you to go out there. And what do? They just go down and vote down ballot for anybody that has an R. It's pathetic. Meanwhile, you got to vote on judges, you got to vote on council members, you got to vote on probably your local police chief. You have to vote on the board of equalizers, supervisors. These are people that affect your policies and civil rights on the daily. And you're not paying attention to any of that. But how come we haven't had more deportations? I didn't vote for this. They're being stopped by rogue judges that likely you didn't vote on because you didn't know. Or maybe you did vote for some of these, but some of them were appointed. Some of them are reelected. Local level, county level. And you're not paying attention. Everything you're complaining about is your first. And most importantly, too, that's what pisses me off about this whole thing. All right, so now I'm gonna read my article that I wrote yesterday, and there's like a clip or two that I'm gonna play, and I'm mostly doing this for those of you that just didn't have access or don't follow me on the socials to read the actual article. I know very few of you actually read the article, so I appreciate you taking that time. But I'm gonna just think of it as the audio book version of it. Okay, so let me just get through this here. And if you already heard it, so this is where you could bow out because this is the last thing I'm going to cover. And then I'm just going to tell you guys, follow me across the socials and this and that. But if you can get through this, fantastic. Okay, the title of this was Moral Conviction or Grandstanding, my take on Joe Kent's resignation, dated October 18th, 2026. And I want to be clear from the onset that I was livid at the news. And that was before I read Joe Kent's resignation letter. Though to me his resignation is nothing more than political grandstanding, that is not the purpose of this article. My intention is to provide nuance to the issue at large, not contribute to the mudslinging between the dissident right and MAGA types. The latest episode of right-wing infighting drama involves the sudden resignation of Joe Kent as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC. As of this writing, Joe is scheduled to appear on a Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens podcast. Obviously, he's been there since. These shows have become openly critical of the Trump administration. His resignation letter, his confirmed appearances on controversial podcasts, and the speculation of a book deal only give Joe's critics the firepower they need to discard him as another raging anti-Israel actor. Be that as it may, when emotions are high, as they usually are when dealing with anything online nowadays, reason and rationality go out the window. To understand why Joe Kent's appointment to the position of NCTC director was celebrated by those in the Intel and GWAT community, GWAT being Global War on Terror, I have to explain the terror assessments that have largely gone unnoticed by both the Biden and current Trump administrations. And here's a picture of Sarah Adams and Dave Boone Benton when we met up last year. Some of you might recognize Sarah from her appearance on The Sean Ryan Show. Sean's company has since platformed her own show, The Watch Floor, which I highly recommend you follow on Rumble and YouTube. She was a CIA targeter best known for tracking down terrorists while stationed in Benghazi. Boone is best known for his heroics as one of the 6 GRS operators that defended the CIA annex in Benghazi, Libya during the September 11th to 12, 2012 terror attacks. So together they authored this book, Benghazi Know Thy Enemy, A Cold Case Investigation. Boone and I got acquainted in 2022 when they prepared to release their book. This was not another Benghazi book. It was a detailed case file on numerous attackers responsible for the deaths of 4 Americans at both the U.S. Special Missions Compound and the CIA Annex. The book contained the last known whereabouts of the attackers and known aliases. The hope was for responsible members in the intelligence community to not only be on the lookout for these terror suspects, but also to work with our allies in the region to bring them to justice. The Biden administration largely ignored imminent threat assessments Boone and Sarah were able to uncover. During one occasion when Sarah did not use the proper channels to pass on timely intel to targeted installations, the Pentagon reprimanded her for doing so instead of taking her intel seriously enough to look into. As a Trump supporter, I had hopes that things would be different under new management. Things did change, but for the worse. Sebastian Gorka briefly served as a deputy assistant to the president and a strategist on national security and foreign policy during Trump's first term in 2017. He was appointed to the role again in the new administration and senior director for counter-terrorism on the White House National Security Council, NSC. Gorka has been accused of largely downplaying certain terror threats. In September 2025, Sarah Adams had been given an appointment to brief members of the NSC on the terror plots against the homeland. That briefing was canceled by Sebastian Gorka, who went on to slander her character to people within the White House. And here is her tweet from August 13, 2025. Gorka canceled my briefing to the National Security Council on AQ's homeland plot. He shouldn't be briefed. He should be fired, POTUS, President of the United States. Well, the FBI deals with counterterrorism. So there was hope for a serious change when Kash Patel became director, along with the new deputy director, Dan Bongino. Nope. Instead, Patel's FBI opened an investigation to determine how Boone was getting his intel instead of analyzing and reviewing the intel. I did do a video to cover that. It's called "Is the New FBI the Same as the Old?" and it's only available on Locals, which I did link on that article. So if you're on Locals watching this, you can see that video. So that same year, Sarah, this is about 2025, along with a group of operators and investigators, including Scott Mann, published a book called The Gathering Storm. In it, they addressed the critical gaps in our nation's preparedness for emerging terror threats following the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. This includes awareness of Al-Qaeda's plot against the homeland. And this is the book cover, available on Amazon on print or Kindle. Next to no one in positions of power and influence were aware of these reports or were writing them off as fear-mongering alarmism. Politically speaking, the Biden administration, which was an extension of the Obama administration, did not like any reports indicating Al-Qaeda was still around and growing in strength. Obama himself declared that Al-Qaeda was destroyed in 2012. In similar fashion, the Trump administration does not like reports indicating that ISIS is still around and also growing in strength, though nowhere near as large as Al-Qaeda. If you'll recall, Trump declared that ISIS was destroyed in 2018. So what hope was there to help inform first responders and the public of awareness and preparedness to terror threats if both the Obama, Biden, and the Trump administrations were not taking it seriously? Enter Joe Kent, retired Green Beret combat veteran and Gold Star husband. His confirmation as director of the National Counterterrorism Center was celebrated by those in the intel space, both active and retired. Joe Kent immediately took note of threat assessments Sarah Adams and Scott Mann detailed in the Gathering Storm. He made them actionable. And here's the tweet that he posted out, and that was the same day that the press release went out, which is September 19, 2025. It says, let me read his tweet. NCTS recently released an unclassified report warning first responders of Al-Qaeda's threat left behind by the Biden administration. We must secure our borders, support law enforcement, and keep Americans safe. Stay vigilant. Let's get to work. And that link was to this press release. And it is linked on my articles. Joe Kent even testified about the 18,000 known Islamic terrorists in our borders. All this while FBI Director Kash Patel and Director of Counterterrorism Sebastian Gorka either downplayed it or dismissed it outright. And this is a clip of his opening statement, but instead I'm going to play this shorter clipping of that, which I believe is worth hearing. So let me cue this up.
Share that with you today. We just recently put out a warning of the heightened risk of terrorist attacks posed to the homeland by terrorists pretty much of all stripes, but in particular from ISIS and from Al-Qaeda. NCTC has been crunching the numbers and going through the sheer volume of known and suspected terrorists that are in the country that came in under the Biden administration. So far, NCTC has identified around 18,000 known and suspected terrorists that the Biden administration let come into our country. These are individuals who under normal circumstances would never be allowed to enter our country because of their ties to jihadi groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yet the Biden administration not only let them into the country, and in many cases facilitated their entry into the country, just like the entry of the Afghan terrorists who committed the terrorist attack here just before Thanksgiving, killing one of our National Guard members and wounding another. That Afghan was brought into the country as a group of over 100,000 Afghans who were brought here during the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. These individuals, despite what has been reported, were not vetted properly to come into the United States.
He was the only one that was bringing this up. The role of the director of National Counterterrorism Center is to integrate, analyze, and share terror-related intelligence, maintain the authoritative databases of known and suspected terrorists, provide terrorism analysis, and drive whole-of-government action to counter terrorist threats against the United States. Joe Kent served as the principal advisor to Director of National Intelligence, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard. It is worth noting that Tulsi is not supportive of the current operation against Iran. Joe Kent's resignation comes at the worst time. Since March 1st, there have been 4 confirmed terror or attempted terror threats on U.S. soil. March 1st, Austin, Texas bar shooting. March 7th, New York City attempted bombing. March 12th, Old Dominion University shooting, Norfolk, Virginia. March 12th, Temple Israel synagogue attack, West Bloomingfield Township, Michigan. Sebastian Gorka serves as the principal advisor to the president and NSC leadership on counterterrorism matters, including threats, policy options, and responsive strategies. He's to coordinate interagency efforts across the Department of Defense, State Department, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, CIA, ODNI, and NCTC, and others to develop and implement counterterrorism policies. He's someone, Gorka, that has proven untrustworthy and no one is really talking about it. And it is to that point why I am upset at Joe Kent's resignation. He was in position of influence and effectuating change. What good will he do now, having resigned and relegated himself to cannon fodder for political pundits and critics? This is from the Babylon Bee. Man bravely resigns from Trump administration at great cost of doing podcast tour, getting book deal. I hate that. I hate that it's come to this. Will Joe have a moral conflict when, God forbid, more Americans are harmed in the homeland because the other principled advisors did not take threat assessments serious? We need people with the courage to dissent while in the fight to be the change they want to see. So for additional reading, there's Sarah Adams' post. I'll only read a portion of it. And you want to learn about the Al-Qaeda plot against the homeland. For those of you on Instagram, you can find it there. It's pinned. It's called the AQ Plot 2.0 or AQ 2.0 plot, and it's pinned to my Instagram highlights. And it gives an overview of what AQ is planning on doing. But I said I was going to read to you a little bit. This is Sarah Adams' post. I'm frustrated by the resignation of the NCTC Director Kent at a moment when the threat environment demands steadiness, but first I wish him well. These are difficult roles with real consequences, and transitions like this should not come at the expense of continuity in our counterterrorism posture. We have a serious problem and we need a steady hand at the helm to confront it directly. And she goes on to list a bunch of things. You know what? I might as well read it. I'm already here. So there are 2 larger issues that have been discussed around his resignation that cannot be ignored. First, Iran has been the primary state sponsor of terrorism for nearly 50 years. That is not a talking point. It is a foundational reality that has shaped the modern counterterrorism fight. Other actors matter, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood, but Iran has consistently been a central driver, a persistent threat, and a key force behind the scale of terrorism we face today. Second, we cannot afford to rewrite the origins or evolution of conflicts like Syria. I watched how that war began in real time with foreign fighter returnees from jihadist battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan, mobilizing others to join them in efforts to topple Bashar al-Assad. I saw fighters leaving places like Derna and Benghazi to join that fight. These terrorists led the early phases of the war in Syria long before outside powers like the US or Israel developed strategies or showed meaningful concern. Groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS were not byproducts of the conflict. They were architects of it. They bear responsibility, and we should not obscure that. In later years, as external powers became more involved, particularly Russia and the United States, the focus drifted. Strategic competition began to overshadow core counterterrorism objectives. That shift created space for terror groups to adapt, regroup, and believe they could outlast us. And in many ways, they have. Just months ago, more than 3,000 hardened ISIS fighters, some with prior ties to Al-Qaeda and An-Nusra Front, were freed from detention in Syria. Approximately half of those released in Syria have already showed up in Afghanistan, saying they were ready to work with the bin Laden sons in the next 25-year phase of Al-Qaeda's jihad on America. This is how it works. They move on to the next battlefield. We cannot afford revisionist history when it comes to our terrorist enemies. These networks are patient, adaptive, and committed. They are not sleeping, they are planning, and many of those plans are aimed at our homeland. The priority now is not narrative, it is readiness. We either confront this threat honestly or we deal with the consequences later. I ask, will Joe have a moral conviction, knowing that he was in positions to prevent these attacks, and he's leaving after 4 attacks happened in the past 2.5 weeks? And God forbid any more Americans are harmed in future attacks. He's not the one in charge of counterterrorism. That's Sebastian Gorka. That does not inspire confidence. That's why, to me, this is grandstanding. He knows better. Whatever happens will play out. It's just stupid. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so very much for watching this episode of the Andres Segovia Show. I needed to share this and get this out there. And I hope that you learned a thing or two or a bunch. And if you liked it, by all means, please share this with those that you think will benefit from this information, because I hope that this gets out to the people that would most benefit from this information dump that I just provided. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so very much. I'll see you in the next one.